Chapter 2467. Prying? Chapter 2467. Prying. As Yi Futian watched the silhouette of Tianyin Arhat leaving, his eyes revealed a curious look. Tianyin Arhat had actually come just to have a few words with him. It seemed as though he had no other ulterior motive. Yi Futian had also obtained a lot of information from his conversation with the other party. The changes of the world would originate from the original realm. This prophecy had actually first come from the Western Heaven, the world of Buddhism that had not joined the conflict in the original realm. According to the other party, only one or two individuals in the world of Buddhism could make such a prophecy. They should be one of the Buddha lords who stood at the top of the realm. Which Buddha lord would it be? It would certainly not be difficult to investigate. Yi Futian even suspected that it might be a Buddha lord who mastered one of the 6 Buddhist superpowers. Donghuang the Great had come to the world of Buddhism centuries ago and had sought the guidance of a Buddha lord. He had also cultivated one of these 6 superpowers. As for which one he had cultivated, Yi Futian did not know. In the Divine Prefecture, it was only known that Donghuang the Great had come to the world of Buddhism to seek the path. No one knew what path he had sought. All this provided much food for thought. It was worth pondering on. Tianyin Arhat's cultivation is not high, but he can already hear the various voices across the Western sacred land. Having cultivated clairaudience, his master, Tianyin Buddha Lord, must be able to hear across even greater distances. What will happen when Tianyin Arhat reaches the Great Emperor Plain? Yi Futian mumbled. He might be able to hear all the voices in the Western Heaven, said Shen Yi in a low voice. It might be possible. Yi Futian nodded his head. Donghuang the Great might be able to do the same. It was just that he did not know which superpower Donghuang the Great had cultivated. Regardless of which one it was, at the Great Emperor Plain, his might would be extraordinary. It would be unparalleled. From Tianyin Arhat's tone, I suppose he bears no ill will, commented Blind Tai. Although he could not see, his senses were sharp. Tianyin Arhat claimed that his master, Tianyin Buddha Lord, had long known that Yi Futian would come to the Western sacred land. Tianyin Arhat paid Yi Futian a welcome visit. The other party had even taken Donghuang the Great as an example. He claimed that Donghuang the Great had also come here centuries ago. He wondered what Yi Futian would gain from coming here. If one thought about it, this was a very high evaluation of Yi Futian. Tianyin Arhat held Yi Futian in high esteem, comparing him to Donghuang the Great centuries ago. Why did Tianyin Arhat look so highly on Yi Futian? Was this related to the prophecy? In Four Corner Village, why had Master viewed Yi Futian highly to the point that he did not mind standing out on Yi Futian's behalf and allowing Four Corner Village to join the world? The more he came in contact with Yi Futian, the more Blind Tai felt that Yi Futian might have come from an extraordinary background. He would have an outstanding life. Perhaps in the future, Yi Futian would come in contact with some secrets of the world. Are you Yi Futian from the Divine Prefecture? Someone asked Yi Futian inside the tavern. The crowd had heard Tianyin Arhat and Yi Futian's conversation before this. Some of their hearts were stirred. Tianyin Arhat was an extraordinary figure. Zhu Ho, who was killed by Yi Futian, could not be compared to him. Zhu Ho was just a disciple of a Buddhist sect, yet he already had a high standing in Jianan City as a middle-level renhuang. On the other hand, Tianyin Arhat was a Buddhist arhat. His cultivation was unparalleled and was at the peak of the renhuang plane. The War of 6 Desires heaven shook the entire world of Buddhism. Brother Yi, do you know whether Saint Zhenchan is alive or dead now? Someone asked. There were rumors from Zhenchan Temple that Saint Zhenchan had yet to perish. However, after so long, Saint Zhenchan had not made an appearance. This caused many cultivators to be suspicious. I could barely protect myself in that battle. How would I know how Saint Zhenchan is? Yi Futian replied with a smile. He indeed did not know whether Saint Zhenchan was dead or alive. Brother Yi, you stirred up quite a storm in 6 Desires Heaven and even caused Saint Zhenchan to go missing. I fear that your journey here to the Western sacred land will not be peaceful, someone said. However, Yi Futian himself had probably imagined that there would be a day like this. Hence, he had waited for all Buddha's fest to come here. Otherwise, he would certainly not have dared to act so presumptuously. Of course, It might be that Yi Futian believed no one would know about his arrival. However, Yi Futian never imagined that he would be found by Tianyin Arhat just as he set foot in the western sacred land. News of his arrival had also spread. The various cultivators would certainly all know about it soon. "Thank you for the reminder," Yi Futian replied. He then got up and said, "Let's go." He also realized that many people would certainly come looking for him once news of his arrival got out. It would be difficult for him to have any peace. Although it was all Buddha's fest, and he was currently in no danger, it did not mean that no one would come to him looking for trouble. A group of people got up and walked out of the tavern. They headed outside and then flew up into the sky. The cultivators in the tavern watched as Yi Futian left. They then lowered their heads and continued enjoying their tea. The fact that Yi Futian was here was already exposed. It was impossible for him to enjoy peace. In this holy land of Buddhism, there were countless powerful figures. It was impossible for Yi Futian to keep himself hidden. Yi Futian's group rode on the back of the golden-winged giant praying bird. They looked down on the scenery of the western heaven below. The entire world was bathed in the peaceful and divine light of Buddha. It was very comfortable, yet Yi Futian was not at ease. It was as though he was being monitored. However, when he unleashed his will, he could not sense the presence of people monitoring him. This made Yi Futian realize that the person monitoring him had higher cultivation than he had or was proficient in extraordinary superpowers. For instance, they might be proficient in one of the 6 Buddhist superpowers, Buddha's clairvoyance. This sensation persisted for a long while. Yi Futian knew that it was impossible for him to enjoy peace. He also sensed that more and more people were monitoring him. It was no longer just an individual. "If you all wish to meet me, show yourselves. Why do you need to monitor me from the shadows?" Yi Futian proclaimed loudly. His voice reverberated in the space, causing many cultivators down below to look up at him. At the same time, the figure of the golden-winged giant praying bird dove down. The group of figures landed on the ground, deciding not to continue their journey. In the distance, Yi Futian seemed to see a pair of eyes appear on the horizon. The eyes pierced the endless space and looked towards them. This ability was similar to that of Zhu Ho, whom he had killed. It must be the members of Zhu Ho's force. Tianyin Arhat knew that Yi Futian had arrived in the western sacred land. Yi Futian never imagined that the Buddhist cultivation force that Zhu Ho belonged to would manage to find him so quickly as well. Besides that, figures appeared far in the distance. Some of them were monks, some weren't. All of them had extraordinary auras. Their gazes were all turned towards him. Yi Futian did not know who these people were. Right then, a figure walked over towards them from afar. This monk was extraordinary. His temperament was similar to that of Tianyin Arhat. He was very young and it was difficult to get a read on him. His eyes even gave off a faint, enchanting vibe. "Benefactor Yi," the monk greeted with his hands together as he bowed towards Yi Futian. He seemed very polite. "Master," Yi Futian replied as he returned the gesture. The monk asked, "I have heard much about Benefactor Yi. You are famous in the divine prefecture. You obtained a divine body, cultivated divine techniques, and obtained the inheritances of several great emperors. I am curious, how many great emperors has Benefactor Yi obtained inheritances from?" Yi Futian felt somewhat strange. As to what was strange, he could not pinpoint it. In his mind, the inheritances of the great emperors that he cultivated surfaced naturally. Although he did not verbally reveal them, he naturally would think about them when asked by the other party. At that moment, Yi Futian sensed that the other party was smiling. When he saw this smile, Yi Futian felt even stranger. He felt a faint sense of discomfort. It was as though he was being pried on. This man is a practitioner of telepathy. He can read the thoughts of others. "Layman Yi, do not fall for his trick," said a voice from afar. It was a transmitted thought of Tianyin Arhat. He was listening to all that was happening in the western sacred land. He had heard that something was happening over here, so he reminded Yi Futian. "You really enjoy meddling in the affairs of others," the strange monk said with a smile. On the other hand, Yi Futian's expression changed. No wonder he felt as though he was being pried on. It turned out that his thoughts were read by the other party. Chapter 2468, Purge Their Souls? Chapter 2468, Purge Their Souls? Yi Futian's expression turned cold. When the other party asked him questions, the answers would naturally surface in his mind. He never imagined that his thoughts would be pried on. Buddha's telepathy could pry into the minds of others. The monk before him had intentionally strung him along to pry into how many great emperor inheritances he possessed. However, this was no secret in the divine prefecture. Many cultivators there knew about this. They also knew about his inheritance from Emperor Yi Qing. Yi Futian might as well not think much about it. After discovering the other party's ability, he immediately controlled what he was thinking. He merely stared at the other party and said, "Master, you are an accomplished monk. It seems somewhat despicable of you to pry into the minds of others." Although his tone was calm, he was no longer as polite as before. No one would be comfortable after having their thoughts pried on like this. "I was just curious, so I used telepathy to take a peek. Benefactor Yi, please pay no heed to it," the enchantingly handsome monk said as he smiled and put his hands together. "I will not mention what I have seen. Benefactor Yi, you need not worry." Yi Futian's gaze was cold and indifferent. When encountering such a cultivator, who could pry into the minds of others, one had to control their thoughts all the time. This sensation was very uncomfortable. One had to be careful when coming in contact with such people. "I wonder whether Saint Zhenchan is doing well," the monk continued. He was still curious. This time, Yi Futian controlled himself and did not think of the answer. He merely stared coldly and indifferently at the other party. He had already fallen for this trick once. He naturally would not be strung along by the other party anymore and have his thoughts pried on again. Right now, he only had one thought in mind, and that was how to deal with this monk. When he read this thought, the monk placed his palms together, smiled, and said, "I am the disciple of Tongchan Buddha Lord. Benefactor Yi, I can understand that you are dissatisfied with me. However, in the Western heaven, your way of thinking is somewhat absurd." This monk was actually Tongchan Arhat. His standing was extremely high and was comparable to that of Tianyin Arhat. Otherwise, he would not have stepped forward to pry into the secrets of Yi Futian's mind. Right now, many of the people present were major Buddhist figures. Yi Futian knew that the other party was speaking the truth. Yet, alone in the Western sacred land, even elsewhere, it was almost impossible for Yi Futian to do anything to Tongchan Arhat. Yi Futian shifted his gaze and looked at the other cultivators around them. Many of them came with ulterior motives. This was especially so for the cultivators in front of him from the same sect as Zhuho. They cultivated under Shenyan Buddha Lord. Shenyan Buddha Lord was well versed in Buddhist doctrine. He could observe the entire space and was one of the Buddha Lords of the world of Buddhism. His sect was one of the more powerful ones, and the cultivators under him were also outstanding. Zhuho was merely one of the many exceptional cultivators under him, and he already had a high status in the great Brahma heaven. However, he was killed in Jianan City by Yi Futian. The crowd stared at Yi Futian's group. Their gazes shone with the golden light of Buddha, giving off an extraordinary vibe. They stared rudely at Yi Futian and his group. Just like Zhuho before, they were monitoring them without any scruples. Divine techniques, method of light. They mumbled as they looked toward Fang Xiun and then at Chen. When their gazes landed on Hua Qingqing, they revealed strange looks and said, "You are a Buddhist yourself. Why have you joined this person's side?" Hua Qingqing looked at the person who had spoken and said, "The spirit of Buddhism is not found in cultivation but in the heart." When they heard what Hua Qingqing said, they frowned. Yi Futian also said, "Back in Jianan City when we encountered Zhuho, he acted unscrupulously. When he encountered my disciple, he immediately pried into my disciple's cultivation. Seeing that he was stronger, he wanted to bully the weak and directly control my disciple. I rushed over in time and killed him. Originally, I thought that he was an outlier among the Buddhist sections. However, I never imagined that there were so many like him. It seems that I have thought too highly of all of you." "Humph," a cold chide could be heard. A person said in a cold tone, "If a disciple of ours breaks his vows, he will naturally be punished according to the laws of the sect." Since when was it your place to kill a disciple of our sect? Such an overbearing Buddhist sect, mocked Chen. He then said, based on what you say, if a disciple of your sect tries to kill us, we can only bear with it. We cannot defend ourselves and should wait for your sect to settle the issue? However, by the way you handle things, why should we hope for you to settle things? What a joke. The other party was unmoved even after Chen Yi said this. They continued saying coldly, after all of you killed Zhu Ho, you involved innocent people and massacred people of other clans. How dare such cruel and bloodthirsty people speak of Buddha? If it weren't all Buddha's fest now, we would have purged your souls, another monk added with a tone as cold as ice. His robe fluttered even though there was no wind blowing. The light that shot out of his eyes was extremely blinding. Yi Futian looked at the other party and said, I have broadened my horizons by coming to the Western sacred land. A while ago, I encountered cultivators from the dark world. Although the way they acted was cruel and merciless, at least they did not act under the guise of compassion and use Buddha as an excuse. From my point of view, all of you who practice Buddhism but bring harm to others are worse than the cultivators from the dark world. Yi Futian had always treated others politely. However, these people were not being courteous at all and actually claimed they would purge the souls of Yi Futian's group. If that were the case, he naturally did not need to hold back. He lashed out with his words, not giving the other party any face. As expected, as soon as he finished speaking, streaks of golden light of Buddha shone and enveloped the entire space. Yi Futian could sense a faint murderous intent amidst this Buddhist aura. Even the supposedly peaceful light of Buddha became eerie at that moment. What Qingqing said is right. The spirit of Buddhism is not founded on cultivation. Even though all of you cultivate the powers of Buddhism, you're not worthy of being called Buddhas, commented Yi Futian calmly. His body glowed radiantly as he was surrounded by divine light. Pressure similarly emanated from his body to fight against the domineering light of Buddha. It is currently all Buddha's fest. We still need to wait a few days more before we can engage in fights, Tongchan Arhat said with a smile. His interruption caused the tension between the two powers to come to a halt. Buddha is merciful. If today weren't all Buddha's fest, I would have purged all of your souls here in Western Heaven. That would have prevented you from continuing to be a scourge to all, said a cultivator who was a disciple of Shenyan Buddha Lord. Golden beams shot out from his eyes as he stared at Yi Futian and his group. The light of Buddha emitted by this cultivator was piercing. Is that so? Chen Yi cast a glance at the other party and unleashed the power of light. Light beams emitted from Chen Yi's eyes as he glared at the other party and said, if it weren't all Buddha's fest today, you would most likely only be able to purge yourself even after you borrow the power of your seniors. The cultivation of these newly arrived cultivators was ordinary. Even the strongest were merely at the peak of the Renhuang Plain. Chen Yi was not afraid of them at all. It was only wishful thinking for them to want to kill Yi Futian's group with their cultivation level. Everyone, don't forget about the ordeal in Six Desires Heaven and Saint Jinshan. Tongchan Arhat spoke again. He seemed to be motivated by a desire to see the world in chaos. Back then, quite a few Lord-level figures had perished in the fight in Six Desires Heaven. Saint Jinshan was a top figure among the cultivators from the Buddhist sects, yet he had also died in that commotion. Right now, even though Yi Futian had lost the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, his own combat ability was surely very powerful as well. If the two parties were to engage in a fight, it was still uncertain as to whose souls would be purged. Chapter 2469, The Great Buddha. Chapter 2469, The Great Buddha. Several Buddhist cultivators under the tutelage of Shenyan Buddha Lord now stepped forward, their eyes radiating the frightening light of Buddha, aimed toward Yi Futian and the others. Yi Futian frowned. These people really wanted to start something? Under the examination of Buddha's clairvoyance, Fang Xiyuan and the others felt extreme discomfort. Since they had no way to resist, it was as if everything of theirs were being exposed. Furthermore, surreal images appeared behind them. It was a vision enabled by the Great Path's superpowers. Of course, even more cultivators fixed their attention on Yi Futian. The Buddha's clairvoyance could detect all truths. When cultivated to its extreme, it was rumored that the life and death of all living beings could be seen. The detection of cultivation method was but only a small trick this superpower was capable of. It was one of the many uses of Buddha's clairvoyance. However, at the moment, Yi Futian's entire body dazzled with divine light. It was as if there was a protective layer of light about him, which even the Buddha's clairvoyance was unable to invade. Under the surveillance of those heavenly eyes, nothing substantial could be seen. They could only see Yi Futian standing there quietly, surrounded by divine light. He was tremendous and imposing as he stood there. The sense of transcendence was palpable. Watching the sight before them, many sneered coldly inside. It seemed that Yi Futian was indeed exceptional. The Buddha's clairvoyance was of absolutely no use against him. Yi Futian was like an enigma that couldn't be understood or captured. Yi Futian continued standing there quietly, his eyes frosty cold. His eyes were ever-changing as he looked toward those Buddhist cultivators who were looking back at him. This one look seemed to bring those cultivators into another world, another space. I come from the divine prefecture in awe of Buddhism, observing the commandments of all Buddhas fest, but what are you all doing? Yi Futian chided them, and his voice reverberated through the void. The hearts of those Buddhist cultivators shuddered. Many of them experienced a prickly pain in their third eye. Not only did they fail to see through Yi Futian, but also they were affected by him. The cultivators in the far distance were a little shocked when they beheld this scene. This Yi Futian was truly remarkable. However, at this time, above the void, there were two figures surrounded by the blazing light of Buddha. Many monks would bow to salute these two whenever they encountered them. One of them was an old monk, while the other was quite young. They were both under the tutelage of Shinyen Buddha Lord. The old monk was a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, while the young man was the first disciple under Shinyen Buddha Lord, known as Shinyen Arhat. The two of them looked at Yi Futian at the same time, and a pair of elusive eyes appeared in the void. They were somewhat similar to the Buddha's clairvoyance, which was used previously by Zhu Ho. However, their prowess was not comparable, not even close. Under the scrutiny of Buddha's clairvoyance, Yi Futian felt that even with the power of the Great Path protecting around him, he was completely transparent. It was like nothing could be hidden from the other's prying gaze. He even wondered whether it was a mistake in coming to the sacred land of Western Heaven. The abilities of these Buddhist cultivators were completely different from those practiced in the divine prefecture. These abilities could see into too many secret things. As the old monk unleashed the Buddha's clairvoyance, his eyes grew unsteady. It was as the images he was perceiving frightened him a little. What he saw was not Yi Futian, who was surrounded simply by the divine light of the Great Path, but a massive towering figure that resembled a deity. This figure was a little fuzzy to him, even at his advanced cultivation level. He was unable to discern it completely. He knew that his realm was not high enough, and his Buddha's clairvoyance was far from reaching the ultimate peak form. But there was no doubt in his mind that the images he saw were a foreshadowing of sorts. At least, Yi Futian would be a super powerful existence in the future, which accounted for the vision that had appeared before them. You came from the divine prefecture and stirred up a storm in Six Desires Heaven. You slaughtered our cultivators of Buddhism. Now you show up here on the sacred land of the Western Heaven. What is your intention? The old monk interrogated him with a voice as great as a bell ringing. Each other word shook Yi Futian to his core. Yi Futian felt his heart palpitate as his breathing became unsteady. Suddenly, he could clearly sense that the other's eyes seemed to pry into something more. Something invisible and untraceable moved. The stronger he was, the harder it was to detect his cultivation. I heard that the sacred land of the Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism, but the visit today was rather disappointing. As for why I am here, is there any reason why I'm not allowed on the sacred land of the Western Heaven? Yi Futian retorted as he raised his eyes to look at the other. His stance and aura were not any lesser, even when he repudiated a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. After all, before this moment, he had killed many cultivators who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. The sacred land of Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism. Naturally, People are allowed to come and seek Buddha's enlightenment. However, it is inappropriate for you to come to the holy land of Buddhism after you have slaughtered disciples of Buddhism. A powerful Buddhist cultivator in the distant void now spoke up. It seemed that many people were aggrieved with Yi Futian in this sacred land of Western heaven. Since Yi Futian stepped into the Western world of Buddhism, everything he did had angered many people. Every one of those Lord-level figures that had died at his hands was considered a powerful force in the world of Buddhism. But because of someone like him who came from the divine prefecture, each of them had met their unfortunate death, which curtailed the power in the Buddhist world considerably. More importantly, Lord Initial Zen and Saint Junshan themselves were Buddhists, cultivators belonging to the orthodoxy of Buddhism. Why would I slaughter disciples of Buddhism? Yi Futian retorted. He understood the displeasure these people had toward him. However, ever since he entered the Western world of Buddhism, he had been trapped in situations he had not created. It could be said that he could not find a peaceful moment. Under those circumstances, he had no choice but to struggle and resist. Hence, leading up to everything he encountered afterward. Humph! Cold disdain sounded in unison, as these Buddhists still seemed unwilling to let bygones be bygones. But at this moment, above the sky in the distance, a peaceful and benevolent light of Buddha flooded the sky, and a voice spoke. Amitabha! The sound of Buddha lingered, resounding through heaven and earth. A towering and sacred Buddha statue appeared on the distant horizon, cast with gold. However, this golden Buddha statue was on the move. It was as if it were not a statue but a real person. When they saw the appearance of this Buddha statue, numerous Buddhists who were present immediately bowed down to pay their respect, including countless cultivators from the sacred land of the Western heaven. All of them clasped their hand in front of them to worship him. Many recognized this statue, as it was a Buddha commonly enshrined and worshipped by many in the sacred land of the Western heaven. Buddha Lord. Greetings to the Buddha Lord. All these voices echoed one after the other, and those cultivators under the tutelage of the great Buddha were paying their respects with humility. The cultivators from Western heaven were even more emotional. They were witnessing the manifestation of the Buddha Lord right in front of their eyes. Yi Futian's gaze also fixed in that direction. The golden Buddha statue was shining with infinite light of Buddha, sheltering all of the Western heaven. He appeared quite advanced in age. He was clearly a great Buddha who had cultivated for numerous years. Which Buddha Lord is this now? Yi Futian thought. Several Buddha Lords in the Western world of Buddhism were revered and worshipped by the world. The Buddha Lord that appeared now was probably not the Lord of all Buddhas. Benefactor Yi came all the way from the divine prefecture, and this is hardly our way of receiving guests. All Buddha's Fest is a major event in our world of Buddhism, so stop making more troubles for our guests. This voice resounded through the void. When all these Buddhist cultivators heard these words, they knew they could not do anything to Yi Futian anymore. They all bowed down deeply to that Buddha Lord. Yi Futian. That Buddha Lord looked at Yi Futian. At this moment, Yi Futian felt so comfortable bathing in the light of Buddha. He bowed to the Buddha Lord and said, Yi Futian greets the Buddha Lord. No need for formalities. The Buddha Lord said, You came from the divine prefecture to the Western heaven. What's your business? Yes. Yi Futian nodded and said, I would like to ask for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Everyone was astounded when they heard Yi Futian's request. An audience with the Lord of all Buddhas? They never thought that Yi Futian would be thinking of doing that. It was no easy task for top Buddhist figures to gain an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Amitabha. The Buddha Lord looked at Yi Futian and said, It all depends on your own fortune. Having said that, the Buddha statue disappeared. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. After he disappeared, Yi Futian looked in that direction and appeared thoughtful. It seemed that not everyone in Buddhism was like the cultivators currently in front of him. This Buddha Lord, for example, was tremendously gracious and forgiving when there was no need for him to be. Since he had manifested and made an appearance, it was obviously not some disingenuous overture. Which Buddha Lord is this? Yi Futian asked. Everyone around him should have known him. Just him, a cultivator from the divine prefecture, did not. Wutian Buddha Lord, someone said. With a turning of his mind, there was no place that Wutian Buddha Lord could not reach. He was one of the supreme existences in the Buddhist sect, cultivating celerity, also known as teletransportation. Any destination could be reached as quickly as a passing thought. Chapter 2470, Grandmaster Yumu? Chapter 2470, Grandmaster Yumu. After Wutian Buddha Lord vanished, the expressions of those who were giving Yi Futian a hard time before turned to great displeasure. However, they did not dare to say anything that challenged the command of the Buddha Lord. They could only look at Yi Futian with disdain and said, "You have slaughtered our cultivators, but now you are asking for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. That's crazy man's talk." The Lord of all Buddhas had long transcended the world, no longer bound by the 5 elements of the earth. He was not someone who would receive visitors lightly, not even those Buddha Lords could ask for an audience whenever they liked. Now, all Buddhas fest did pose an opportunity, but they would not agree to Yi Futian asking for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Many of them looked at Yi Futian with a cold and indifferent expression. Even if there were a chance for Yi Futian to meet the Lord of all Buddhas, with them around, they would make sure that never happened. "You are lucky that Wutian Buddha Lord made a personal appearance," someone commented coldly. Although they did not dare to make further trouble for Yi Futian, they still seemed quite angry. To them, it was as if Wutian Buddha Lord's words could not change their minds. This piqued Yi Futian's curiosity. What was the status of Wutian Buddha Lord in the world of Buddhism? "Benefactor Yi, we will see each other again if it is meant to be," Tongchan Arhat said to Yi Futian with a smile. Suddenly, alertness was shown in Yi Futian's eyes. Again, he felt being spied upon and knew that the thoughts he had previously may have been detected by the other. This superpower of telepathy was so incredible that it was easily forgotten by those around it. However, what he was thinking was nothing of great importance, so it didn't really matter. Tongchan Arhat turned to leave. The rest of the cultivators regarded Yi Futian with indifference. There were still many of them who were hostile towards him. At this time, a Buddhist cultivator suddenly appeared next to Yi Futian, invisible and soundless. He seemed to have emerged out of thin air. There was no warning prior to his appearance, which greatly alarmed Yi Futian. What a strange and uncanny superpower. Buddha's celerity, Yi Futian secretly remarked to himself, remembering one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Buddha's celerity seemed to be an ultimate application of spatial methods and somewhat superior to the great path of space. Its ability to travel freely anywhere without restriction was formidable. With Buddha's celerity, one could easily escape being chased by someone else of a higher realm. When used in tracking others, its success was even more spectacular. Wutian Buddha Lord was a Buddha Lord who specialized in Buddha's celerity. It seemed that this Buddhist cultivator who had just appeared cultivated the same skill as Wutian Buddha Lord. Yi Futian assessed the other man and saw that the man had half of a kasaya hanging on the top half of his body, leaving one of his arms exposed. He looked to be in his mid-30s, simple and honest. He looked as if he was some kind of ascetic cultivator. "Little monk, I am pleased to make your acquaintance, Benefactor Yi." The monk bowed to Yi Futian with his hands clasped in front of him. He appeared extremely courteous. Yi Futian returned his gesture and said, "Yi Futian greets the Grandmaster. How is the Grandmaster to be addressed?" "Little monk, I am called Yumu," the monk replied. A strange look flashed across Yi Futian's eyes. The name Yumu also implied that great wisdom often lay in what appeared to be foolishness. "Greetings, Grandmaster Yumu." Yi Futian saluted him once again. He was very grateful that Wutian Buddha Lord had recently saved him from a tough situation. This Grandmaster Yumu looked to be a cultivator under the tutelage of Wutian Buddha Lord, so Yi Futian was already partial to him, especially since he had been treated so rudely by so many Buddhist cultivators just now. "Benefactor Yi is overly kind." Grandmaster Yumu said, "Little monk, I came here mainly to assist Benefactor Yi in your questions. You are new to the sacred land of Western Heaven. If you have any questions, you can ask me." This Grandmaster Yumu had extraordinary cultivation, yet he consistently referred to himself as Little Monk. Moreover, he was invisible and soundless when he came. Yi Futian barely perceived the slightest aura before his arrival. If this Grandmaster Yumu had chosen to attack him, he would be in an unimaginable bind. There were also several others, such as Tongchan Arhat, who were exceptional cultivators themselves. These people may be the top Buddhist enchanting geniuses of their generation, and the methods of Buddhism they cultivated were unusual and peculiar. Even someone like Yi Futian was full of respect and in awe. He dared not underestimate these top figures. Therefore, even though Yumu referred to himself as little monk, Yi Futian was not so stupid as to follow suit. He merely said, "If that's the case, then many thanks to Grandmaster Yumu. Please." Yumu extended his hand and gestured. But Yi Futian responded, "Grandmaster Yumu, you first." Yumu nodded slightly, then turned to go. He deliberately slowed down to wait for Yi Futian and only moved forward when Yi Futian had caught up to him. When many cultivators saw them leaving, their expressions were still one of cold apathy. However, with intervention from Futian Buddha Lord, there was not much they could do now but to drop the matter entirely. Therefore each of them dispersed. Soon, everyone left and disappeared without a trace. Yi Futian and his party walked above the sacred land of Western Heaven with Yumu. Yi Futian said, "Grandmaster Yumu, I was watching those cultivators from before, and they seemed somewhat to disapprove of the Grandmaster." In fact, he had something else he didn't say. Although the words of Futian Buddha Lord had stopped the advancement of these foes, it did not seem to be a strong enough deterrent. At least, some of those people were still reluctant and continued to threaten Yi Futian verbally. It was not hard to judge their overall attitude. Yumu nodded and said, "Benefactor, ye came from the divine prefecture, so you know that these same situations exist in every realm. The divine prefecture has 18 domains and 18 domain chiefs' manors. Even the great emperor's direct principality is under the control of someone different. How could they be expected to be of one single mind?" From Yumu's reply, Yi Futian knew that he thoroughly understood the meaning behind his comment. Indeed, no matter which principality, there were inherently different factions, and it was impossible to be of one mind. When he first arrived in the world of Buddhism, he thought that the world of Buddhism was one united body, which, in retrospect, was somewhat a naive notion. Under the Lord of all Buddhas, there are many great Buddhas, and different Buddhas have different cultivational concepts. Under the Lord of all Buddhas, there are Buddhas who guard the world of Buddhism, enforce the laws of the Western world, and take charge of all matters in the world of Buddhism. The head of this branch is Tongchan Buddha Lord. Zhenchan Temple, which Benefactor Yi was in a prior altercation with, and Lord Initial Zen, who perished, all belonged to this branch, Yumu explained. When Yi Futian heard this explanation, he immediately understood why Tongchan Arhat appeared so unfriendly. It seemed that Buddhist cultivators in this branch all borne the meaning of Zen in their name somewhere. In addition, there are also preaching Buddhas. This kind of Buddhist cultivation is responsible for the preaching of Buddhist teachings in the world of Buddhist. My master, Futian Buddha Lord, belongs to this branch. There are also Buddhist cultivators who observe those cultivators in the world of Buddhism and listen to the voices within it. Finally, there are also Buddhas of penance who are devoted to Buddhism and care not for earthly affairs. Yi Futian nodded slightly when he heard the explanation from the man. He now had a rough understanding of the order of things and people. "Thank you, Grandmaster, for your detailed explanation," he said. "There is one other thing that I am quite curious about. It was said that hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great came here to seek Buddhist instruction, taught by the Lord of all Buddhas himself. Previously, I have also heard that Donghuang the Great had cultivated one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Do you know which superpower he cultivated in?" asked Yi Futian. "Was Tianyin Arhat the one who told this to you, Benefactor Yi?" Yumu asked. "He was." Yi Futian nodded. All Buddhas Conference of Western Heaven will be held in the last month of All Buddhas Fest, at which time, all the Buddhas of Western Heaven will be there to discuss the Buddhist teachings and methods until the end of the fest. Since this would be the 10,000th year of the All Buddhas calendar, the Lord of all Buddhas will likely make an appearance this time around. However, This conference is strictly a meeting for all the Buddhas in Buddhism to exchange their methods and teachings, and all the major Buddhas will be present. If you attend, you will most certainly stick out like a sore thumb. Furthermore, you have offended many Buddhist cultivators. I don't think you will even be allowed entry there, Yumu continued. All Buddhas conference, Yi Futian murmured. All the great Buddhas of Western Heaven would gather in one place, and indeed, it might be difficult for him to get in. How did Donghuang the Great get to meet the Lord of all Buddhas back then? Yi Futian asked suddenly. When Yumu thought about that, he couldn't help but show a solemn look on his face. It was as if he was still awed by the memories of it all these years later. He said, Donghuang the Great went to all Buddhas conference to discuss the teachings of Buddhism and outshone all of the Buddhas. Chapter 2471. Imitating Donghuang. Chapter 2471. Imitating Donghuang. Yi Futian felt a little disquieted inside when he heard what Yumu said. Since his arrival to the world of Buddhism, the name of Donghuang the Great was often mentioned. This legendary figure, a genius of heavenly might, was a youngster compared to the Lord of all Buddhas. However, he had now stepped into the imperial realm and ruled over all of the divine prefecture. Donghuang the Great once visited the world of Buddhism, defeated all the Buddhas who were in attendance, and was favored by the Lord of all Buddhas, who had passed one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism onto him. What a magnificent sight it must have been, for Yumu to be transported to that time in awe at the mere memory of the event. When he spoke of Donghuang the Great, his eyes were full of longing. It was as if he wanted to be transported back to that era and relive the exceptional undertaking of Donghuang the Great. Although Yi Futian and Donghuang the Great were on opposing sides and each had their own stance, Yi Futian greatly admired the capabilities of Donghuang the Great, whose legendary deeds were breathtaking. If he was destined to be on the opposing side of Donghuang the Great, what a terrible fate would that be? Even his own talent was unparalleled. Yi Futian could vaguely sense a powerful oppressive force when he thought of Donghuang the Great. It was an elusive sense of suffocation. Could someone, such as the Emperor of Divine Prefecture, be truly swayed? Forcing himself to abandon these wayward thoughts, Yi Futian returned to reality once again, as he looked at Yumu, saying, all the great Buddhas will be attending all Buddhas conference to discuss teachings and methods of Buddhism. Can outsiders attend as well? All Buddhas conference, held at Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven, was the grandest of all Buddhist events that would be taking place during the All Buddhas Fest. There is no hard and fast rule that says you can't. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great himself had participated in the All Buddhas conference to discuss Buddhism. However, Benefactor Yi may encounter greater difficulties in attending the conference this time. After all, many people here are hostile as far as Benefactor Yi is concerned, Yumu replied. He seemed to have guessed what Yi Futian was thinking. I understand. Yi Futian nodded. When those cultivators left previously, they had already told him threateningly that he couldn't meet the Lord of all Buddhas. However, without seeing the Lord of all Buddhas, the matter regarding Hua Qingqing could not be resolved, meaning that they would have failed to accomplish the goal of this trip. He already had several life and death experiences during this trip to the Western world of Buddhism, which proved valuable. But he had also suffered heavy losses. The divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor was destroyed, and what was gained by the experience he had was far less than the damages that were caused by the loss of the divine body. Now that all Buddha's conference was upon them, they had to give it a go, no matter what. Even if they failed, at least they tried. For him, the rule that no blood could be shed during all Buddha's fest was significant protection that could be used to his advantage. He believed that no one would dare violate the one cardinal rule of all Buddha's fest on such a grand occasion, where even the Lord of all Buddhas himself might appear. I heard that on the sacred land of Western Heaven, there are Buddhist scriptures hidden in ancient temples and the like, and none of them are guarded against outsiders. Those who wish may come and go as they please to observe and comprehend these scriptures. Am I right? Yi Futian asked Yumu. Yumu glanced at him, nodded, and said, yes, Buddhism imparts Buddhist teachings. The sacred land of Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism. Naturally, it is the first to make those teachings available to all. These Buddhist scriptures are copied by major ancient temples, so that anyone who comes to the sacred land of Western Heaven to cultivate may have access to them. Of course, those who could come to the sacred land of Western Heaven were themselves extraordinary figures already. They were cultivators of advanced and profound realms. These people were all figures in the top echelon of the Western world, and it was very significant for these people to preach Buddhism to them. Furthermore, besides the secret methods of Buddhism and other rare superpowers, most of the scriptures of Buddhism can be found in the ancient temples of Western Heaven. Yumu continued, Benefactor, ye meant to follow in the steps of Donghuang the Great, comprehend Buddhist methods, and use them to participate in the All Buddhas Conference, to compete with other Buddhas? Does the Grand Master think it possible? Yi Futian did not deny that at the moment, this seemed to be the only route he could take. It is hard. Yumu's eyes appeared thoughtful. He said, Little monk, I know that Benefactor Yi is talented above all others, but time is pressing. Benefactor Yi has never been in contact with Buddhist methods before, and it is only dozens of days away from the All Buddhas Conference. If Benefactor Yi meant to comprehend Buddhism in order to compete in discussion with other Buddhas, it will not be an easy task, and that is putting it mildly. Donghuang the Great had done it once. But how many Donghuang the Greats were out there in this world? For thousands of years, there had been no one who could be compared with Donghuang the Great. Several other great emperors were all mighty existences before the time of Donghuang the Great. No matter how difficult it might be, it doesn't hurt to try, said Yi Futian. Yumu nodded and said, Benefactor Yi is right on that front, of course. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great defeated all the Buddhas by the method of Buddhism. Today, Layman Yi, who also came from the Divine Prefecture, would like to repeat history. For this, little monk, I am very curious to see. In the days that follow, I would make sure no one will disturb Benefactor Ye's cultivation in Buddhism. Tianyin Arhat's voice came from the distance as he continued, Yumu, guard Benefactor Yi well, and don't let anyone disturb his cultivation. Yumu pondered for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I wouldn't dare trouble the Grand Master to such extent. Yi Futian said, The Buddha Lord has already come forward to intervene on my behalf once in person. I'm sure no one will come and make trouble. All Buddha's Conference is coming soon. I'm sure the Grand Master must have a lot of things to do before that. Please don't trouble yourselves on my account. Yumu was a disciple of Futian Buddha Lord, so his title ought to be somewhere close to an arhat. Even though he had been more than polite and humble in Yi Futian's presence, he was undoubtedly a great Buddha himself, with lofty status in the Buddhist sect. To trouble others for his own protection was not something Yi Futian felt he was entitled to, nor did he wish to bother the others unnecessarily. It's no trouble. I am taking this opportunity to review some of the Buddhist methods. For, little monk, this is also cultivation, Yumu replied. If the Grand Master insists, I will have no mind to concentrate on my studying of Buddhism. Even if the other man had expressed his willingness, in good conscience, Yi Futian couldn't very well delay others in what they had to do. Seeing that Yi Futian was persistent on this point, Yumu didn't force the issue. Instead, he said, Since Benefactor Yi said so, little monk will not disturb Benefactor Ye's study of Buddhism. However, if there are unforeseen incidents taking place here, little monk will come and handle them. Right now, when all Buddha's fest is happening, there should be no one in all of the sacred land of the Western Heaven will disturb Benefactor Yi. Yi Futian nodded and bowed to Yumu with his hands clasped. Thank you, Grand Master. Likewise, Yumu put his hands together and replied, Then, little monk will take my leave now. Safe travel, Grand Master, Yi Futian responded and saw Yumu stepping forward. However, after just a few steps, the other man's figure disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had never been there before. Even Yi Futian could feel a fluctuation of power originated from the great path of space. Yi Futian was quite amazed by what he saw. Was this Buddha's celerity? Indeed, the 6 superpowers of Buddhism were endlessly wondrous. After Yumu left, Chen Yi asked Yi Futian, Do you really mean to cultivate in Buddhist methods? Is there a problem with that? Yi Futian asked Chen Yi instead. Yi Futian knew that Hua Qingqing had some prior exposure to Buddhism, although that was when she was in the lower worlds. If you can thoroughly understand the important scriptures here, then when you cultivate methods of Buddhism, you will get twice the result with half the effort, Hua Qingqing said to Yi Futian, and Yi Futian agreed. As his divine consciousness pried into the scriptures, all of a sudden, the words floated in his mind. They were the content of the scriptures. At the same time, Hua Qingqing, who was beside him, closed her eyes, and there was a mysterious force gushing out of her. Her soft lips seemed to be moving. A strange sound of Buddha seeped into Yi Futian's ears, and instantly Yi Futian entered into a state of selflessness. At that moment, it was like he had entered the heart of Buddhism, which was an amazing feeling. If he comes to the All Buddhas conference and asks to participate, whatever happens after that cannot be blamed on us. Yi Futian had not yet answered for the killings of their disciples, and now he wanted to participate in the All Buddhas conference to defeat all the Buddhas. If this was not a crazy man's talk, what else could it be? The All Buddhas conference was a major Buddhist event. What happened hundreds of years ago when Donghuang the Great visited was not known to too many people. Only some ancient Buddhas who had cultivated for many years knew exactly what happened once upon a time. But in their generation, and at this time, they would absolutely not allow a similar occurrence again in the Buddhist sect. After Donghuang the Great became emperor, what happened here was discussed in a positive light in the land of divine prefecture and was discussed ad nauseam. However, in the eyes of these Buddhists, their major event was crashed by some outsider, who then defeated all the Buddhas at their methods was certainly not viewed in a positive light. Especially those Buddhist cultivators, who were defeated by Donghuang the Great, must have had a difficult time swallowing their defeats. It was said that some great Buddhas had been in retreat ever since. They had been heavily affected by the event that took place hundreds of years ago and had not yet fully recovered from it. They seemed determined not to come out of their retreat until they had proved the great path. There was even a great Buddha whose existence ended in parinirvana because of what took place. In any case, this matter, within the Buddhist circle, it was definitely a dishonor. Of course, there were some top Buddhas who did not mind it. From their perspective, all beings were equal, and for that, they admired Donghuang the Great. This was because their philosophy in cultivating Buddhism was different from the rest. However, Yi Futian didn't know the things that were happening there. He continued to immerse in his own cultivation of Buddhist teachings and methods. Before they knew it, there was only 7 days' time left before the start of the All Buddhas conference. Yi Futian stopped his comprehension of Buddhism and did not continue to cultivate in the ancient temple. At this moment, Yi Futian and his group were here, on top of a peak in the western heaven. Next to the cliff, one could survey the vast space of the western heaven below. Yi Futian sat with his legs crossed, surrounded by golden light. Now, it was no longer just a simple light of Buddha. His body seemed to have turned into a golden body. He was radiant all over. It was as if it was the body of an ancient golden Buddha. With this transformation, he was surrounded by many Buddhist runes, while sounds of Buddha lingered in the air. In Yi Futian's life palace, the entire life palace was surrounded by golden light of Buddha, as if it had been transformed into a Buddha's world. Chapter 2473, Golden Coastal Region. Chapter 2473, Golden Coastal Region. Yi Futian opened his eyes. The golden light of Buddha gleamed around him. Faintly, there seemed to be sounds of Buddha lingering between heaven and earth, solemn and holy. The cultivation methods of Buddhism were indeed exceptional. It calms one's body and soul, elevating one's overall state of mind, Yi Futian whispered. Hua Jieyu and Hua Qingqing walked up behind him. Hua Jieyu smiled and said, "That's because all the Buddhist scriptures that Qingqing has been chosen for you are superior, making this effect possible." "It's not so," Hua Qingqing said softly. "In Buddhism, there was no such thing as superior or inferior among scriptures, as it is dependent on the person who seeks the enlightenment. However, the Buddhist scriptures I have chosen are in ascending order, which is indeed beneficial to the state of mind. But what truly matters is the cultivator himself." Obviously, Hua Qingqing was complimenting Yi Futian. "Speaking of which, if it were not for your help, Qingqing, I would not have been able to enter into such state of cultivation so quickly. I think not just me, but anyone with you assisting in the cultivation of Buddhism would be able to accomplish amazing results, Yi Futian concluded with a sigh. During this period of cultivation, Hua Qingqing's effect on him was as if she lit up his desire for Buddhism. He was already gifted with extraordinary talent, and because of the existence of his natal spirit, it was not difficult for him to cultivate any method of the Great Path. Now, with Hua Qingqing's help, it seemed that he was naturally suited for Buddhist cultivation. He was in perfect sync with it and was able to enter the state of Buddhist cultivation immediately. You two can stop praising each other. Hua Jiyu smiled softly. Although the cultivation of Buddhism is going smoothly, to participate in the All Buddhas Conference, you have to face many top-level great Buddhas in the Western world of Buddhism. Many of them are hostile towards you, including the Arhats. When she spoke of this, Hua Jiyu was not so optimistic anymore. Just as she said, she had absolute confidence in Yi Futian's cultivation. Although it had not been long since he cultivated Buddhism, he had already had astounding successes. Still, it all depended on what kind of opponents he would be facing. However, the All Buddhas Conference was a forum for Buddhist cultivation. If Yi Futian intruded into the conference by any other means, it would be seriously out of place and defied the original intent of the All Buddhas Conference. If there were one great Buddha who had experienced the divine tribulation of the Great Path among those Buddhist cultivators, Yi Futian would be hard-pressed to contend with that. I understand, Yi Futian nodded. Lord of all Buddhas had once cultivated there, and to this day, the spirit mountain of the Western Heaven was still considered the cultivation court of the Lord of all Buddhas. Of course, the Lord of all Buddhas had long since transcended the earthly world and was no longer bound by the 5 elements of heaven and earth. Now, it was most other Buddhas who cultivated at the spirit mountain. All those Buddhist cultivators clasped their hands in front of them, appearing exceedingly pious. They then stepped into the sea and traveled by Buddhist boats, dazzling with the light of Buddha, as if on a pilgrimage. Their entire bodies were submerged in the light of Buddha. As time progressed, many figures could be discerned in this golden sea, scattered in different places in the sea, but all were moving in the same direction. The scene was incredibly spectacular. Who knows when little monks like us will have the opportunity to participate in the All Buddhas Conference? Some Buddhist cultivators with a lower level of cultivation sighed and wondered. His eyes, which focused on the golden sea, were filled with endless yearning. He put his hands together and gestured towards the far distance as if in prayer. In the crowd, many cultivators were doing the same thing he was. That's a Buddhist cultivator under the tutelage of Tongchan Buddha Lord. Someone looked in a particular direction. Tongchan Arhat is also there, someone else added, looking at a wickedly handsome Buddhist cultivator. This group of cultivators stepped into the sea and moved forward. More and more great Buddhas were coming, but they moved forward in the same way, without any exception. This was the only way to reach the Spirit Mountain, as there were no other shortcuts. Even those top Buddha lords had to cross the sea in order to get there. As the time of the All Buddhas Conference drew closer, the number of people in this coastal region gradually decreased. Most of them had already gone to Spirit Mountain in advance, not wanting to miss the grand occasion of the All Buddhas Conference. When Yi Futian and the others arrived, there were not so many people who were crossing the sea anymore. They walked to the very front of the coastal region, looking at the light of Buddha that was sprinkling down from the sky in the distance. The end of the sea seemed to be part of the sky, the ultimate holy land for those who cultivated Buddhism, Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven. However, Yi Futian did not set off immediately but was waiting. When all the Buddhist cultivators were gone, he would then cross the sea. Chapter 2474, Buddhas at Spirit Mountain. Chapter 2474, Buddhas at Spirit Mountain. As time went by, fewer and fewer people were crossing the Golden Sea. All Buddhas Fest had entered its last month, and the All Buddhas Conference would be held on the Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven. With no more Buddhist cultivators to cross over the Golden Sea, many cultivators held lotuses in their hands and placed them into the Golden Sea. Suddenly, those lotus blossoms seemed to be effused with a golden glow, drifting towards the center of the sea as if they were transforming into golden lotus flowers. Countless others repeated this same action. Soon, those who had released the lotus flowers clasped their hands together in front of them, worshipping the golden sea with their eyes closed. The sound of Buddha came out of their mouths. These tremendously pious folks seemed to be praying for blessings. The sound of Buddha reverberated throughout heaven and earth as if forming a resonance in this corner of the world. Futian stood in front of the coast. With the sound of Buddha in his ears, he was compelled to clasp his hands together as well. His expression was one of great solemnity. Nowadays, he considered himself one of the Buddhist cultivators. In their own ways, these cultivators of Buddhism seemed to pray for the success of the All Buddhas Conference. And something seemed to respond to this sound of Buddha, which lingered between heaven and earth. At the end of the golden sea, where it bordered the sky, the infinitely dazzling light of Buddha lit up, then sprinkled over the sea. The light covered this boundless coastal region with an even brighter golden glow. Even a sound of Buddha came from yonder, which created some kind of resonance with the sound of Buddha on this side. Suddenly, many Buddhist cultivators who were unable to cross the sea sat cross-legged by the sea and cultivated there with their eyes closed. The sight in front of them was so spectacular and palpable that Chen Yi, Fang Xiuan, and the others felt its solemnity and holiness as well. They couldn't help but bow, with their hands clasped in front of them, to the other end of the sea. Conceivably, this light of Buddha must be a sign signifying the start of the All Buddhas Conference. Long afterward, the sound of Buddha that lingered between heaven and earth gradually dissipated, but the light of Buddha remained. It continued to illuminate the world. Gradually, some left, while others still sat by the edge of the sea to cultivate. The coastal region with so many people cultivating was, in fact, strangely quiet. "When are you leaving?" Chen Yi walked next to Futian and asked. Futian glanced into the distance and whispered, "It's about time." As he was speaking, he looked at Hua Qingqing beside him and said, "Qingqing, are you ready?" "Yes," Hua Qingqing nodded. Her face was very tranquil, and her beautiful eyes were clear and pure. "Let's go then," Futian said with a smile. As they were still drifting, Futian continued to cultivate quietly and comprehend the Buddhist methods. Hua Qingqing, likewise, stood there quietly, without disturbing Futian's cultivation. After some time had passed, the All Buddhas Conference had been progressing for more than 20 days at this point, with only the last 3 days remaining. Hua Qingqing realized that they were still on the sea, and the distance to Spirit Mountain at the end of the sea had not changed at all. It was as if they would never reach their destination. However, at this moment, there was a sudden surge of the light of Buddha that rippled over the sea, and the golden surface of the sea was suddenly tossed with waves. Then, several figures of Buddha floated up from the golden sea, standing in front of them. Their hands were clasped together in front of them, and the sound of Buddha came out of their mouths. Amitabha. Likewise, Hua Qingqing put her hands together and bowed to salute the Buddhas who were present. Finally, Futian stopped cultivating as he opened his eyes, clasping his hands in front of him, and saluted. "Youngster Futian comes to visit the Spirit Mountain of the Western Heaven. You two benefactors are both endowed with roots of wisdom," another Buddha said. Then among them, the water mist surged from the golden sea, turning into a golden door, which illuminated another world inside, as if it was the grand view of the Spirit Mountain. "Thank you, Grandmaster." Futian bowed again to thank them. Then, the Buddha boat continued moving forward and drifting towards the door. Soon, the Buddha boat went through the door and drove inside. In the next moment, it disappeared. When they disappeared, the door disappeared immediately as well. All the phantoms of the Buddhas turned into a watery mist and returned to the sea. Everything was as it was before, as if nothing had ever happened. However, in another place, when Futian and Hua Qingqing reappeared once again, there was no more Buddha boat under them. They were standing on pure soil now. Looking forward, they saw a sky full of Buddhas as the light of Buddha shone upon them. From bottom to top, many Buddhas could be seen standing in this space. When they beheld the sight before them, Futian and Hua Qingqing were both very solemn. They put their hands together and greeted all the Buddhas in the sky, appearing extremely pious. The Buddhas seemed to know that they were coming, and they seemed to be waiting for them. Countless eyes fell on the two of them. under the brilliance of the light of Buddha. Both Yi Futian and Hua Qingqing felt an invisible sense of pressure. This was not deliberate, however. Whoever faced so many Buddhas in the sky at once would feel the pressure just like they did. Chapter 2475. Dharma of the Alakanatha Battle Form. Chapter 2475. Dharma of the Alakanatha Battle Form. Yi Futian looked at all the Buddhas in the sky. Although he felt the pressure distinctly, he would still face it with the utmost tranquility. In Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven, all the Buddhas in the sky, from the bottom up, were organized with an obvious hierarchy. Those Buddhas with stronger cultivation were sitting in higher places. It seemed that there were several layers of heavens. This was something that Yi Futian took notice of. Everything in the world had its own order. The same held true for even the Buddhas. Yi Futian, you had killed disciples of Buddhism. How dare you show your face in Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven? There was a voice that came from above, chastising him. A pressure of might now spread towards Yi Futian as many eyes fell on him. Many of them were obviously hostile. They never imagined that Yi Futian would dare to come here and step on the ultimate holy land of Western Heaven. Yi Futian looked around at the Buddhas. His expression was calm enough. He asked, "May I ask the Buddhas this? What if someone was trying to take your cultivation, robbing you of your divine items, and threatening your life? What would you do?" No one answered him, but they knew why he asked. Everything that happened previously in Six Desires Heaven was because those cultivators had attempted to take the divine body away from him. I ask the Buddhas humbly, would people who act like this be worthy of being called Buddhas? Yi Futian followed up with yet another question. On the Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven, there was a moment of silence. Then a great Buddha responded, "Not worthy. In that case, I haven't slain any Buddha. These claims are nothing more than baseless, false accusations." Yi Futian clasped his hands together and continued, "Yi Futian came here today, seeking an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas." As the Buddhas whispered amongst themselves, many Buddhist cultivators glanced at Hua Qingqing, who stood behind Yi Futian. They could discern that there was something extraordinary about her. However, for Yi Futian to take her here to see the Lord of all Buddhas was clearly a bit self-aggrandizing on Yi Futian's part. Of course, they also knew that Yi Futian came here this time because he wanted to emulate Donghuang. "Yi Futian, you came from Divine Prefecture and have only been in the Western Heaven for a few months. For what reason do you think you deserve an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas?" A Buddha asked. Some people even jeered in their hearts. This guy had not a clue of his own ability nor its limits. Buddha says that all beings are equal, and there is no distinction of high and low. I am here sincerely asking for an audience. Why is that forbidden? Yi Futian asked in return. All beings are equal, and there is no distinction between high and low. However, there is a distinction between high and low in Buddhist methods, someone replied. Yi Futian, the All Buddhas Conference is a time when all Buddhists gather to study the methods with each other. We know that you meant to emulate the feat of Donghuang the Great, but you have only cultivated in Buddhist methods for mere months. It's still a long way away from when you can compete using Buddhist methods. Furthermore, even if you are outstanding in Buddhist methods, it is no guarantee whether the Lord of all Buddhas wishes to grant you an audience. All beings are indeed equal. It is precisely because of this that all beings have no obligation to agree to any demands from the others. Yi Futian nodded slightly and said, I understand it is completely up to the Lord of all Buddhas to decide whether he will receive me or not. Although I have only cultivated Buddhist methods for a short time, I know that the cultivation does not lie in the length of time. I have no intention to follow in the footsteps of Donghuang the Great. I am only here because I desire an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Since this is the only opportunity available to me, that is why I am here. As he was speaking, he took a few steps forward and said, Therefore, Yi Futian would like to exchange Buddhist methods with the Buddhas who are in attendance. Please advise. He put his hands together once again and bowed to salute them. He appeared to be very respectful. However, he was neither obsequious nor arrogant when facing all these Buddhas in the sky. He was extremely calm and confident. Upon the spirit mountain, Buddha's peaceful and benevolent light covered this space, making it more holy than ever. The Buddhas looked at the man with white hair, and they were a little curious. Hundreds of years ago, another cultivator came from Divine Prefecture to exchange with the Buddhas. What would be the difference between this one and Donghuang the Great from once upon a time? Since Benefactor Yi wants to have an exchange in Buddhist methods, who is willing to give it a try? Said a great Buddha at the highest place of Spirit Mountain, clearly granting Yi Futian's request. Yi Futian looked over there and saw that the speaker was none other than Wutian Buddha Lord himself, and he felt a little relieved. His uninvited presence at Spirit Mountain of Western Heaven was truly a bit disrespectful. The worst-case scenario was he being forcibly driven out of Spirit Mountain. If that happened, it would definitely be impossible for him to see the Lord of all Buddhas. The words of Wutian Buddha Lord, no doubt, gave him a fighting chance. All the Buddhas in the sky fixed their eyes on Yi Futian. They could perceive Yi Futian's cultivation at the peak of Renhuang in the 8th realm, and they had long heard of Yi Futian's combat effectiveness. When he was in the original realm, they had already heard that Yi Futian was an invincible existence in the Renhuang realm. With the help of the divine body, he could punish even those who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. Of course, Yi Futian couldn't leverage the divine body or any other objects at present. He had only the option to fight using Buddhist methods. And Yi Futian had only cultivated the Buddhist methods for a few months. It was in this context that the Buddhas had taken Yi Futian's cultivation into consideration. At this moment, a Buddha came forward. His entire body was brilliant and massive. It was as if cast from pure gold. His cultivation was exceptional, Buddhist Path 9th Realm, which was equivalent to peak Renhuang. This is Giant Spirit Buddha, Wutian Buddha Lord introduced. Giant Spirit Buddha bowed with his hands together in front of him, and said to Yi Futian, Benefactor Yi, pleased to meet you. Yi Futian looked at Giant Spirit Buddha, who was several heads taller than himself. His hands clasped in front of him, and he was surrounded by golden light. He sat down cross-legged and said, There is a mention in Buddhist scriptures that as long as the Buddha's heart is determined and faithful, it cannot be shaken, and that Akalanatha battle form could be achieved. Is that correct? It seems that Benefactor Yi has indeed paid attention in the cultivation of Buddhist methods, praised the Giant Spirit Buddha. If so, please go ahead. When Yi Futian finished speaking, Yi, who was sitting cross-legged, closed his eyes. His heart was as steady and indestructible a rock. His entire body was shining with golden divine light, and a humongous Buddha statue appeared now, turning into the Dharma of Akalanatha battle form. Both of its hands were held in different positions. It was as if his thoughts had been proven and had turned him into a Buddha. This sight truly astonished the many Buddhas on the Spirit Mountain, and the Giant Spirit Buddha was no exception. However, his body began to expand and enlarge. It turned into a Buddha, which was about the same size as the Alakanatha battle form, but even more stalwart and full of power. The expanded version of Giant Spirit Buddha was holding a Vajra pestle radiated with the light of Buddha. He picked it up overhead with both his hands and smashed directly towards the Alakanatha Buddha form. However, Yi Futian remained motionless, his eyes closed. His inaction caused many people to sweat for him. When the Vajra pestle blasted down, a violent roar was heard, and the Alakanatha battle form shook because of it. But its golden torso did not suffer the slightest crack, and it remained as immovable as a mountain, true to the meaning of indestructibility. The golden light of Buddha circulated above the Dharma of the Akalanatha battle form. It was as if many Buddhist runes were floating around, making him a true incarnation of the Buddha. When he saw this, the Giant Spirit Buddha knew that he had lost. He put down the Vajra pestle and put his hands together to bow to Yi Futian. Just as Benefactor Yi said, the cultivation of Buddhism does not depend on the length of time spent in cultivation. For you to achieve the Akalanatha battle form in just a few months and comprehend the truth there within, I dare say Benefactor Yi is indeed predestined with my Lord Buddha. Little monk, I am ashamed that I am not fit to compete. After that, the Giant Spirit Buddha stepped back out of his own volition. Yi Futian came to the Spirit Mountain of the Western Heaven to exchange Buddhist methods, and in just one battle, he had demonstrated his attainments in Buddhist methods to all the Buddhas in the Western Heaven. Chapter 2476, Buddhist Spell. Chapter 2476, Buddhist Spell. Benefactor Yi has already acquired the essence of Alakanatha battle form. It seems that he accomplished much in these past few months of cultivation. Nobody should underestimate him, a great Buddha commented as he looked at Yi Futian, who was below. The Dharma of Alakanatha battle form was also known as Alakanatha battle form, a very powerful battle form in Buddhism. The cultivation of this battle form was extremely demanding regarding one's state of mind. No one ever suspected that Yi Futian would fully comprehend and cultivate this technique in such a short period. In another direction, many Buddhist cultivators looked at each other. Shen Yan Arhat was among these cultivators. Not long ago, they discussed that Yi Futian had only cultivated Buddhism for months and did not stay long in the many places he visited. He would go to some ancient temple for 2 or 3 days before moving on to another one. They did not think this was the way for anyone to cultivate Buddhism properly. But obviously they were wrong. They had underestimated Yi Futian's talent in Buddhism. Not only did he successfully cultivated Buddhist methods, but he had also achieved great things. Although the giant spirit Buddha was not some major Buddhist figure, he was, after all, an existence in the 9th realm of the Buddhist path. Nevertheless, he was unable to break apart Yi Futian's battle form. The gap between the two was glaring. This demonstrated that Yi Futian's strength was so considerable that unless it were top-level Buddhist cultivators, it would not be easy to repel him. Yi Futian opened his eyes and looked at all the Buddhas. He then walked forward with a solemn expression, hands clasped together in front of him. He maintained a grave and dignified demeanor without being the least impertinent. His lips moved slightly, and sounds of Buddha seemed to come out of his mouth. It was rather difficult to hear what he was saying, only the lingering sound of Buddha was audible. He walked forward as if he intended to get to the highest point on a whim. This was to meet the greatest Buddhas of them all, the Lord of all Buddhas. Those great Buddhas felt a sense of déjà vu when they beheld this sight. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great, like him, walked all the way up to the top and had met the Lord of all Buddhas. Yi Futian likewise was also from the divine prefecture. Bang! Another great Buddha stepped out at this time. This great Buddha was a Buddhist cultivator under Tianluan Vajra Buddha Lord. He had an amazing aura that gave the onlookers a sense of incredible pressure of aggression. When he was standing in front of Yi Futian, a golden dharma appeared behind him, as a domain suddenly manifested between heaven and earth with Yi Futian in the middle of it. Height above the sky, numerous glaring Vajra Buddhas appeared, pressing down with mighty coercion. These glaring Vajras were fierce and frightening, with terrifying auras. The Buddha that had walked out also transformed into a Vajra Buddha himself. As he stretched out his golden right arm, suddenly, those glaring Vajras also stretched out their arms, blasting towards Yi Futian at the same time. However, a series of ancient, golden words continued to pour out of Yi Futian's lips, as the sounds of Buddha lingered. That Buddhist cultivator who walked out had a look of caution on his face. This was a Buddhist spell. Did he actually cultivate the Buddhist spell? All around Yi Futian, powerful and domineering Vajras holding the Dharma, spewing out mantras as an unparalleled golden light of Buddha radiated from them. When those many arms blasted down for the kill, they found they could not move him 1 inch. At the same time, with the sound of Buddha that poured out of Yi Futian's mouth, many of those Buddha phantoms in the void began to crack, then they shattered. A Buddhist mantra in the form of runes landed on them, causing their golden body to collapse and pulverize. Aside from those Buddha phantoms, the Buddhist cultivator that had walked out suffered too. Countless runes of Buddhist mantra attached themselves to his golden body and erupted in golden divine light. The light of Buddha was blinding as his golden body exploded. He let out an enraged scream, trying to escape the runes of mantra. However, the runes were endless and infinite, completely shrouding the void. Along with those roaring sounds, the golden body shattered, and that Buddhist cultivator was knocked out. He gave a muffled groan as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. His golden body was broken and he was injured. Yi Futian bowed his head and said nothing. He clasped his hands together in front of them and continued moving forward. When that Buddhist cultivator saw Yi Futian coming, he involuntarily backed away to let Yi Futian walk past him. Vajra spell. All the Buddhas looked at Yi Futian in amazement. In addition to the Alakanatha battle form, Yi Futian had also cultivated the Vajra spell, a Buddhist spell. There were many powerful spells in Buddhism that were extremely effective. There were even spells that could transcend the dead and send them into the cycles of reincarnation. The spell Yi Futian used just now was the Vajra spell, which was a particularly domineering type of spell. It was a perfect complement with the Alakanatha battle form, and together, they formed a powerful and unstoppable duo. It was no wonder that the Buddhist cultivator had been unable to stop him from advancing. It was pure coincidence when Yi Futian first cultivated this spell. He had already cultivated the Vajra demon-slaying rhythm previously, which was a rhythm technique of Buddhism. It turned out that Vajra demon-slaying rhythm was derived from the Vajra spell, which was also a part of the spell itself. With an existing foundation and an expert in the way of rhythm, Yi Futian's cultivation of the Vajra spell was a natural choice. He was able to take control of it quickly, and its power was indeed domineering and tyrannical. Afterward, another Buddhist cultivator came out, still someone in the 9th realm, but there was no success. He was crushed by Yi Futian, just like all the others before him. With the Vajra spell on top of the Alakanatha battle form, Yi Futian was solid and unmovable. However, the others could not withstand his attacks. They couldn't even stop his advancement, as he was still walking forward. Seeing that Yi Futian was so impossibly dominant, some Buddhist cultivators stepped forward one after another. Some wanted to stymie Yi Futian's forward progress, and some wanted to experience Yi Futian's strength. But all of them, without exception, were not able to stop him. On both sides, there was a collection of quite a few wounded cultivators. However, Yi Futian was merciful. He didn't go overboard and hurt anyone grievously, as all of them were only slightly injured. After all, this was the spirit mountain of the Western Heaven, the supreme holy land of the world of Buddhism, the place where the Lord of all Buddhas once cultivated. Soon, Yi Futian passed through the lowest layer and stepped up onto the golden sea of clouds. All around him, the auras of these Buddhist cultivators were becoming stronger, as their statuses were also elevated. Just as that great Buddha said before, all beings were equal, and there was no difference among Buddhas. However, there was a distinction between Buddhist methods. From the highest point, those Buddha lords watched Yi Futian making his way up towards them. Some Buddha lords whispered, "I didn't expect that someone from the divine prefecture, after having cultivated Buddhism for a few months, could reach this level of achievement. It seems that unless the direct disciples of the Buddha lords intervene, it will be difficult to stop benefactor Yi." Could it be that the Buddhas cultivated the methods for many years and are still not as good as the few months someone spent in cultivation? Other great Buddhas looked around the crowd and questioned. This great Buddha was none other than Shinyen Buddha Lord, whose speech was as belligerent. His gaze was frightening. Zhu Ho, who was killed in Jianan City, was a disciple of his. Of course, there were many disciples under him, and the death of one was hardly a great matter to him. As someone who was a Buddha Lord, he didn't need to deal with the nitty-gritty of these matters. Nonetheless, it was his disciple who had died, and now the culprit had come here, crashing through the spirit mountain of the Western Heaven. He was certainly unhappy about this turn of events. If this man were allowed to pass through Spirit Mountain, wouldn't it be a slap in the face for the Buddhas who were here?